There's a quiet exhaustion that comes from living inside your head too long, where every thought becomes a debate and every silence feels unfinished. You try to think your way to peace, but the mind keeps multiplying its questions faster than you can answer them. The more you analyze, the more distant stillness feels like chasing your reflection across a restless sea. Something inside you pauses. Not because you've solved anything, but because you're too tired to keep running in circles. And in that pause, something miraculous happens. The noise begins to lose its authority. Thoughts still come, but they no longer drag you with them. You start to see them for what they are. Visitors, not masters. Freedom doesn't mean silence. It means space. The space to feel without judgment, to think without drowning, to breathe without explaining. When you stop trying to control every thought, the mind softens. It's like untangling a knot, not by force, but by patience. Slowly, clarity emerges, not as something new, but as something that was always there beneath the noise. This is not a journey of escaping your mind, but of understanding it. The peace you've been chasing is not ahead of you. It's hidden behind the noise you've been fighting. All it asks is your willingness to stop resisting and to finally listen. Welcome to freedom from overthinking. The mind is a restless traveler, always searching for certainty in a world that was never built to stay still. It runs from thought to thought, memory to memory, trying to fix what no longer exists and control what has not yet arrived. In this constant motion, exhaustion becomes a quiet companion. You start to notice how thinking has become an endless maze, every path looping back to the same place, nowhere. Yet beyond this motion, something softer begins to stir, the awareness that you no longer wish to chase your own shadow. You start noticing how every problem grows when you feed it with attention. What you think about most begins to wear grooves into your mind, repeating like echoes in a canyon. Every solution feels temporary, every answer followed by another question. The mind craves closure, yet fears silence. It is both the creator and the prisoner of its own motion. Freedom begins not in more thought, but in learning to step aside and watch thought move without attachment. When you stop forcing your mind to solve everything, space appears where tension once lived. The endless spinning of ideas begins to slow, like a wheel running out of momentum. You realize that not every thought demands a response. Some can be allowed to pass like wind over still water. You begin to understand that peace doesn't come from controlling the mind. It comes from no longer identifying with its storms. Each thought carries the illusion of urgency. The mind insists that if you don't think fast enough, you'll lose control, that the moment you stop, something terrible will happen. Yet when you finally rest, nothing breaks. The world continues to breathe without your constant supervision. This realization cracks open a truth you had forgotten. You were never meant to think every second of your life. Some moments are meant to be lived, not analyzed. The quieter you become, the more the mind reveals itself. It was never your enemy. It was your protector, shaped by fear, trained by habit. It kept running because no one ever taught it how to rest. Now, by observing instead of resisting, you start to teach it calmness. You learn to breathe through the noise instead of believing it. What you witness without reaction begins to dissolve on its own. Stillness is not the death of thought. It is the clearing of the fog that thought created. You watch the patterns, how one worry breeds another, how the past keeps rewriting itself in the present. You no longer try to silence the noise. You simply stop giving it a stage. Gradually, the inner tension begins to loosen, and the space inside you feels wider than it ever has before. You start to feel what true awareness is, the part of you that watches the mind spin without spinning with it. That observer is untouched by thought. It doesn't argue, it doesn't correct, it simply knows. The mind keeps offering distractions, but awareness holds steady, like a mountain unmoved by wind. The more you rest in that awareness, the more the mind tires of its own chaos. In this stillness, even fear changes shape. What once felt like an endless wave of uncertainty now feels like energy that rises and falls naturally. You see how emotions come and go, how no state is permanent. The mind is always in motion, but you no longer confuse motion with meaning. You stop believing that peace requires the absence of thought. It only requires the absence of struggle. The pattern of overthinking begins to weaken when you no longer feed it. Each time you stop following a mental loop, it loses a little of its strength. You begin to sense freedom not as a grand awakening, but as subtle moments of release. The breath between sentences, the pause before a reaction, the silence after understanding. What once felt unbearable now feels manageable, not because the world changed, but because your relationship with thought did. You've discovered that you don't have to fix everything to feel at peace. You can hold uncertainty gently, as one holds a delicate object carefully, without pressure. In this softness, you find control without force. Calm thinking is not empty, it is focused. You think less, but with clarity. You no longer drown in every passing idea. You begin to use thought as a tool instead of being used by it. Like a craftsman with a sharpened blade, you employ your mind only when needed and keep it sheathed when not. The chaos that once ruled you becomes an instrument for awareness. In this new rhythm, patience starts to bloom. You are no longer rushing to arrive at the next thought or the next conclusion. Every moment becomes enough on its own. You find beauty in incomplete answers and wisdom in quiet pauses. The need for resolution fades, replaced by the grace of understanding that not knowing is also a kind of knowing. Even conflict begins to change. The arguments inside your head lose their sharpness. You stop trying to win against yourself. Thoughts of guilt, fear, or doubt may still appear, but they are met with silence instead of judgment. That silence becomes your strength, a quiet defiance against mental chaos. Awareness now becomes a friend instead of an effort. You catch your mind wandering and gently guide it back without blame. The loops that once trapped you begin to unravel, not because you forced them to stop, but because you stopped believing their stories. The energy that was once spent on worry now returns as presence. You begin to experience peace not as a temporary state, but as your natural condition. It doesn't depend on circumstances or achievements. It is not something you create. It is what remains when the noise quiets. The less you interfere, the clearer it becomes. The mind, once frantic, learns to mirror the stillness of your awareness. Even when overthinking tries to return, you greet it with understanding. You see it not as failure, but as memory. The habit of constant motion takes time to fade, but it loses its grip every time you choose awareness over reaction. You have stopped feeding the beast that once ruled you, and now it begins to sleep. You notice how simplicity returns to life. Ordinary things, breathing, walking, seeing, feel vivid again. The smallest moments carry meaning because they are no longer buried beneath thought. You realize that peace was never missing. It was always hidden beneath layers of mental commentary. With each breath, another layer lifts. The clarity that follows is not dramatic, but profound. You feel grounded without effort, awake without tension. The mind may still wander, but it no longer drags you into confusion. You walk beside it, aware, gentle, free. Life begins to feel spacious again, as if the air itself carries calm. The moment the mind stops running in circles is not an explosion of light, it is a quiet arrival. You realize you have been here all along, beneath the noise, beneath the worry, beneath the effort to become peaceful. Calm was never something to find. It was what remained when you stopped chasing it. And in that stillness, you finally rest, not because the world outside has changed, but because you have stopped spinning within it. The circle has broken. The chase has ended. Thought continues, but you are no longer caught in its motion. You have discovered what the mind forgot. Peace doesn't begin when the noise stops. It begins when you stop running. The mind is quick to defend, quick to interpret, and even quicker to judge. Every word, every glance, every silence feels like something to decode. You have lived for so long in this reflex that it feels natural to react before you even understand. Yet deep inside, there is a quiet wish to simply hear, to listen without the weight of assumption. This is where freedom begins, in the delicate space between what is said and what is understood. Listening is not just a skill of the ears, it is a discipline of presence. To hear without reacting means to stand still within yourself while the world moves around you. It asks you to be aware of your emotions without being ruled by them, to hold space for experience without labeling it as right or wrong. This kind of listening is not passive. It is active peace awareness without interference. The mind often confuses reaction with response. Reaction is born from habit, from the old patterns that rush to protect your identity. Response, however, is born from clarity, the pause that allows truth to be seen before emotion takes control. In this pause, you find the power to choose, not from fear, but from understanding. The difference between peace and conflict often lives in that single breath. Every time you react automatically, you hand your calmness to something outside you. A tone, a look, a word. All can become triggers when you forget to observe them. But when you stay still long enough to see the story your mind begins to tell, you regain power. You realize that nothing can truly disturb you unless you participate in your own disturbance. To hear without reacting does not mean to suppress your feelings. Suppression is silence, built on resistance, and it always cracks under pressure. True stillness allows emotions to move through you, naturally, felt, acknowledged, released. You begin to notice how every feeling has a rhythm. It rises, peaks, and fades. You no longer chase its peak or resist its fall. You simply allow it to pass. You start to see how often your reactions are not to the present, but to memories. Someone's words remind you of an old wound, and suddenly you are not hearing them. You are hearing the echo of the past. Awareness of this pattern breaks its hold. You begin to listen to what is actually being said, not what your history wants to believe. That is how presence becomes stronger than pain. Learning to hear without reacting is learning to witness life without immediately reshaping it. It is seeing reality as it unfolds, without your interpretation coloring every detail. You watch how the mind wants to assign meaning instantly, yet you no longer rush to follow. The silence between hearing and reacting becomes your teacher. It shows you that truth only reveals itself to the still observer. Even in conversation, silence becomes more powerful than speech. You stop interrupting to prove, to correct, or to defend. You begin to realize that listening is not waiting for your turn to speak. It is understanding the heart behind the words. The less you argue, the more clearly you see others not through the filter of your emotions, but through compassion. When you stop reacting, the energy inside you changes. What once felt sharp and tense becomes steady and grounded. You no longer carry other people's storms inside your body. Their anger, their confusion, their noise all pass through you without staying. You learn to hold peace like a clear glass of water, unstirred by the winds of emotion. This calm presence does not make you indifferent, it makes you deeply aware. You start to feel the difference between hearing noise and hearing truth. The noise demands attention, the truth needs none. You recognize that not every situation requires your opinion, and not every feeling requires your involvement. Sometimes, the most powerful response is stillness. Reactions are born in the space between thought and awareness. When you narrow that space, you become trapped. When you widen it, you become free. Listening expands that space naturally. You start hearing life as it truly is, full of contradictions, beauty, and impermanence. The less you interfere, the more clearly it reveals its rhythm. when the mind no longer rushes to defend itself. You begin to see how much energy was spent on illusion. Every argument in your head was a reflection of the fear of being misunderstood. But when you understand yourself, misunderstanding from others loses its sting. Peace begins to flow naturally, like air returning to a room that was once tightly sealed. The practice of non-reaction teaches humility. You accept that not everything needs to be understood instantly. Some truths arrive quietly, over time. You stop forcing meaning out of every experience and begin to let meaning find you. This surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. You no longer chase understanding, you create the space for it to appear. You start noticing that listening deeply changes your relationships. You become the calm presence people trust, not because you agree with them, but because you see them. Real listening is healing. It allows others to be without fear of judgment. As you give that space to others, you learn to give it to yourself. You stop arguing with your emotions and begin to hear what they've been trying to say. The mind learns through observation, not resistance. When you watch your reactions without acting them out, they start to dissolve. Each observation weakens an old pattern. What once felt automatic becomes optional. You begin to understand that awareness itself is transformation. You do not have to change the mind, you only have to see it clearly. The more you practice listening without reacting, the more peaceful your world becomes. Conflict loses its grip because your participation feeds it no more. You stop matching noise with noise, anger with anger. Silence becomes your most powerful voice, one that speaks without words and teaches without trying. This silence does not separate you from life. It connects you more deeply to it. You begin to notice sounds you once ignored, the subtle tone of sincerity, the hesitation behind harsh words, the emotion behind laughter. You start to see how every expression carries a story, and understanding replaces judgment. In this awareness, patience grows naturally. You no longer rush to fix or correct. You give time the space to reveal its own wisdom. You understand that peace does not come from winning an argument, but from losing the need to have one. The quieter your reactions, the louder truth becomes. You realize that listening without reacting is not about others, it is about you. It is a form of self-care, a way of protecting your inner world from unnecessary chaos. You become the keeper of your peace, aware but not shaken, open but not consumed. What once felt like restraint now feels like mastery. To hear without reacting is to live without defense. It is to meet life as it comes, untouched by the noise of fear. You are no longer a slave to emotion or thought. You become the space in which they move, the awareness that remains unchanged. And in that still awareness, you find what the mind could never give you, the quiet strength of understanding. The effort to control every thought is like holding your breath and calling it peace. The mind was never meant to be contained. It was meant to be observed, yet you try to direct it, manage it, discipline it into silence. The harder you grip, the heavier it becomes. Control turns into pressure, and pressure becomes exhaustion. What you call order is often the mind's way of hiding its fear of freedom. You spend hours negotiating with your thoughts, trying to make them kinder, smarter, more acceptable. You label some as good and others as bad. Believing peace comes from choosing correctly. But thoughts are not moral. They are movements of energy passing through awareness. When you start judging them, you multiply their noise. The more you reject what arises, the more power you give it. The mind craves structure because uncertainty feels like danger. It wants to predict, to define, to know. Yet every attempt to control thought is an act of mistrust in life. You start believing that peace depends on mastery instead of surrender. But control is not calm, It is the disguise of fear pretending to be discipline. You cannot force stillness. You can only stop resisting it. Every time you try to block a thought, it finds another way in. Like water, it adapts to whatever shape resistance takes. Suppression is not control, it is delay. You push discomfort down, only to feel its surface stronger later. Real freedom is not found in pushing thoughts away, but in watching them without holding them hostage. You begin to see that control carries its own tension. The constant effort to maintain mental purity creates fatigue deeper than any external labor. The mind becomes tight, as though it is holding its breath. And in that tightness, even silence feels sharp. What you call discipline has turned into an invisible prison. The weight of control is subtle but relentless. It creeps in when you correct yourself for feeling too much, when you rehearse conversations before they happen, when you doubt every spontaneous emotion. Each correction adds another brick to the wall, separating you from peace. The more you fix yourself, the less you feel whole. True awareness does not demand control. It allows thought to move freely, the same way the sky allows clouds to pass. When you stop grasping at every idea, the mind begins to rest on its own. This rest is not emptiness, it is balance. It is the natural state that appears when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable. You start to understand that not every thought deserves your attention. The mind creates thousands of them daily, most passing without meaning. Yet the desire to control turns harmless noise into personal suffering. The thought itself is light, your resistance is heavy. When you learn to let them float by, their power disappears. Control often hides beneath the illusion of responsibility. You think, if I don't manage my thoughts, chaos will take over. But chaos does not arise from lack of control, it arises from fear. The mind that trusts life no longer needs to police itself. It allows thought to move like waves while resting in the still ocean beneath. In awareness, you realize control was never your task. The mind was designed to think, just as the heart was designed to beat. You can guide it, but you cannot stop it. To fight thought is to fight nature. Freedom begins when you stop trying to sculpt your mind into perfection and start recognizing that even imperfection is part of the design. You see how control becomes self-centered, the belief that your will must shape reality. Yet life has its own rhythm, untouched by your intentions. The more you try to control what you think, the less space you leave for insight to appear. True clarity is born not from management, but from openness. The moment you relax into awareness, the heaviness begins to lift. The noise doesn't vanish immediately, but your relationship with it changes. The mind becomes a landscape rather than a battlefield. Thoughts still move, but they no longer collide. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the space that thought cannot disturb. The more you observe, the lighter you become. You begin to see thoughts like ripples on a lake, rising and falling without consequence. You no longer chase them or hold them back. In that acceptance, energy returns energy once wasted in the endless attempt to control. Peace begins to replace pressure. The mind's chaos was never the problem. Your attachment to control was. Every time you tried to force peace, you built resistance against it. But peace is not fragile. It can coexist with noise, confusion, and doubt. It doesn't need the mind to be empty, only open. The illusion of control keeps you from feeling the natural rhythm of life. When you loosen your grip, intuition begins to guide you. The right thoughts appear when needed, and the wrong ones pass without harm. You discover that awareness has its own intelligence, one far wiser than the effort to manage it. In letting go of control, you begin to trust the mind's flow. You see that thoughts are not intrusions, but invitations, each one showing you something about yourself. Even uncomfortable thoughts lose their power when met with curiosity instead of control. They dissolve under the warmth of understanding. You begin to live lighter, no longer obsessed with mental perfection. You make peace with imperfection, with uncertainty, with the mind's natural rhythm. You realize that mastery is not control but cooperation. The calm mind is not one that stops thinking, it is one that no longer fears its own thoughts. The weight once carried in constant correction begins to lift. What remains is quiet clarity, the awareness that peace was never lost, only covered by effort. The less you control, the more naturally balance appears. The stillness you sought through force now blooms through surrender. Freedom from control is not chaos, it is harmony. You begin to experience thought as movement within stillness, the song of consciousness itself. Nothing to fix, nothing to manage, only awareness, watching the flow of life unfold. The mind rests not because you made it still, but because you finally allowed it to be free. And in that freedom, you feel the lightness that control never gave you. The mind no longer feels like a burden, but a bridge. A way for awareness to experience the world without being lost in it. The weight has lifted, not because thought disappeared, but because you stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. The mind prides itself on its ability to dissect everything, to label, categorize, and explain. It believes understanding comes only through effort, that wisdom is built from relentless examination. Yet beneath that noise of reasoning lies another intelligence, quiet, patient, and infinitely precise. Stillness begins to see what thinking cannot. It doesn't argue with life. It simply recognizes what already is. You start noticing how the mind exhausts itself, trying to reach conclusions. Every thought demands another. Every answer births more questions. It's like chasing clarity through a fog that thickens with motion. But stillness doesn't chase. It waits, and in that waiting, things become clear without the struggle. Truth does not need to be hunted, it needs to be seen. Analysis is a tool, but the problem begins when the tool starts using you. You try to solve emotions as though they are equations, trying to balance feelings with logic, yet life cannot be solved. It can only be felt and understood from a place beyond calculation. Stillness is the space where the mind finally steps aside, so awareness can see without distortion. When you stop trying to think your way into peace, peace begins to find you. It moves softly, without structure, beyond language. Stillness doesn't fight with the mind. It outgrows it. The more you settle into silence, the more intelligence begins to rise naturally. Answers start appearing, not from thought, but from awareness itself. You begin to see that overthinking is not depth, it is distance. The mind circles around what it cannot touch because it fears quiet truth. Stillness, on the other hand, stands unafraid. It can hold confusion without panic, sadness without collapse, uncertainty without rushing to fix it. That patience is its wisdom, the kind that analysis can't reach. Stillness teaches you to listen beneath the surface. It hears what is not said, feels what is not visible, and knows without explanation. The more you rest in that awareness, the more you realize that intelligence is not measured by thought speed, but by the quality of presence. A single moment of still awareness can reveal more than hours of reasoning. When you stop dissecting every experience, life begins to feel whole again. You no longer need to analyze beauty to appreciate it. You stop looking for lessons in every hardship and start feeling their quiet power directly. Stillness turns existence from a problem to be solved into a mystery to be lived. The mind loves motion, and stillness loves understanding. The two do not oppose each other, but one must lead. When thinking leads, you get complexity. When stillness leads, you get clarity. The wisest thoughts arise not from constant effort, but from a quiet space that thinking cannot disturb. In stillness, Patterns that were invisible start to reveal themselves. You see how life moves in cycles, growth, decay, rebirth, and how your mind has always been a part of that rhythm. You no longer fight uncertainty, you study its texture. In doing so, you realize that patience itself is a form of intelligence. Analysis often comes from fear, the fear of not knowing, of not controlling. But stillness does not need control. It trusts that understanding will arise naturally when the noise fades. The quiet mind no longer demands proof. It recognizes truth in simplicity. What once seemed complicated now feels transparent. You begin to sense that the deeper mind, the one that observes rather than reacts, has always known what to do. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It simply moves with the rhythm of awareness. This is not passivity. It is alignment. The still mind acts when needed and rests when not. That balance is wisdom in motion. Stillness doesn't abandon analysis. It refines it. You learn to think with clarity, not clutter. Thoughts become precise tools rather than scattered fragments. You stop trying to solve what doesn't need solving and start focusing on what truly matters. Thinking regains its purpose, to serve awareness, not replace it. When you live in stillness, understanding arrives without strain. Insights appear in the quiet spaces between breaths. Problems dissolve not because they were solved, but because they were seen from a higher perspective. What once felt tangled now feels simple, because awareness cuts through complexity with silence. The most intelligent action often comes from non-action, from waiting until the noise settles. You stop rushing decisions and allow clarity to mature naturally. Stillness gives birth to timing, and timing gives birth to grace. The right choice often arrives when you stop forcing the wrong one. You begin to see how much energy was wasted on constant mental commentary. Stillness removes the need to narrate life. You stop telling yourself what is happening and begin to experience it directly. The absence of analysis reveals the raw truth of each moment, unfiltered, unmeasured, real. Even in conversation, you sense when silence speaks louder than explanation. You no longer rush to fill every gap with words. The pause between thoughts becomes the space where true understanding grows. Stillness listens deeply, and through that listening, wisdom responds without hesitation. Stillness is not ignorance, it is the highest intelligence. It doesn't need to dissect reality to know it. It perceives wholeness without division. The more you trust it, the more natural it becomes to rest in awareness rather than in thought. The mind still thinks, but now it moves within the rhythm of stillness, light, effortless, free. You start realizing that thinking less does not make you less capable. It makes you precise. Every thought now has depth because it comes from clarity instead of compulsion. The mind becomes quiet not because it is empty, but because it is full of peace. Thought becomes an instrument of stillness, not its interruption. The deeper you go into stillness, the more wisdom feels less like learning and more like remembering. It's as if the truth was always there, waiting for your noise to fade. You stop chasing understanding because you have become the space that holds it. The calm mind is not slow, it is timeless. And when stillness becomes smarter than analysis, you begin to live from awareness, not anxiety. You act without overthinking, speak without fear, and rest without guilt. Intelligence no longer means complexity, it means clarity. You see that the quiet mind doesn't need to prove it's wise, it simply is. The mind has been taught to worship completion. It seeks closure, resolution, and the comfort of tidy endings. Yet life rarely obeys that structure. The more you try to force every experience into meaning, the more unnatural it becomes. True peace begins when you stop demanding perfection and start allowing things to exist in their own rhythm. The unfinished is not a flaw, it is a form of grace waiting to unfold in its time. You begin to notice how tension builds from the need to conclude everything. The mind cannot rest until every question is answered, every emotion explained, every story closed. But life breathes differently. It opens slowly, holds its breath, and pauses in mystery. The pause itself is sacred. To leave something open is not failure, it is trust in what is still becoming. Letting things be unfinished does not mean abandoning them, it means respecting the process. Every flower opens when it must. Every healing takes the time it needs. When you rush growth, you wound it. Stillness teaches you that half-formed moments carry their own quiet wisdom. Incompletion is simply a stage in the language of transformation. The mind fears what it cannot define. It labels uncertainty as weakness and unfinished business as chaos. But the soul moves differently. It understands that beauty often lies in imperfection, in what is still learning how to be. You start to feel compassion for the parts of you that are not yet complete. And that compassion becomes the bridge between effort and peace. Control disguises itself as care. You tell yourself you're simply trying to fix, improve, or perfect. Yet beneath that effort lives fear, the fear of not being enough, of being misunderstood, of losing control. But when you learn to sit in what is incomplete, the fear softens. You begin to see that incompletion doesn't define you, it refines you. The power of letting things be unfinished lies in trust. Trust that the path knows more than your plans, that the heart heals at its own pace, that silence has meaning even when it feels empty. You no longer rush the unseen hands of time. You begin to believe that what is meant to be whole will find its shape naturally. When you stop forcing closure, space opens for depth. The unfinished moment holds potential that completion can never give. It invites curiosity, humility, patience. Every unanswered question becomes an opportunity to grow instead of an obstacle to escape. The unknown, once terrifying, begins to feel alive, a quiet invitation instead of a threat. You realize that even in nature, nothing truly ends. It only changes form. Seasons shift, rivers move, stars fade into other light. The unfinished is the way of life itself. To resist it is to argue with creation. To accept it is to join the dance of becoming, to live aligned with the current of what is real. Letting go of the urge to finish allows you to breathe differently. You stop racing against imaginary deadlines. You stop measuring progress by how quickly it concludes. You start valuing depth over speed, essence over result. Life begins to feel spacious again, because you are no longer suffocating it with expectations. When you allow yourself to be unfinished, self-judgment begins to dissolve. You no longer treat your healing as a checklist. You stop comparing your pace to others and begin to honor your timing. Growth ceases to be a competition and becomes a communion. You meet yourself exactly where you are, without shame for what has not yet bloomed. The art of leaving things open is not laziness, it is wisdom. It teaches you to trust that some answers come in whispers, not declarations. It teaches you to listen instead of forcing sound. The more patient you become with life's silence, the more it reveals its quiet structure, one that was always unfolding perfectly beneath your effort to control it. Even relationships find new peace through this understanding. You no longer demand that others be who you want them to be right now. You allow them to exist in their own evolution. The conversations left unfinished become bridges, not barriers. Connection grows not from perfection, but from patience. Unfinished emotions also carry lessons. The sadness you once tried to resolve quickly now becomes an ocean of understanding. You learn to sit beside it, to feel its tides without fearing the depth. Over time, the feeling transforms on its own. Every emotion, when allowed to breathe, finds its natural conclusion without force. Perfectionism loses its power when you realize that completion often limits what could have been. The artist leaves strokes undone because they let imagination breathe. The poet leaves silence between words because the pause holds meaning too. You start to sense that life, like art, needs room for mystery. You no longer rush to label experiences as good or bad, right or wrong, success or failure. You let them stay unnamed until their purpose reveals itself. That patience allows life to speak in its full language. What once felt like uncertainty now feels like wisdom, whispering in a tongue you are finally learning to hear. Stillness deepens through incompletion. When nothing is demanded to end, peace no longer depends on results. You become more grounded in process than outcome. Every unfinished moment feels like a doorway instead of a wall, an opening into presence. The beauty of incompletion lies in its honesty. It does not pretend to know, to fix, or to promise. It simply exists as it is pure, unpolished, alive. The world teaches you to celebrate finish lines, but the soul celebrates the journey that keeps unfolding. You begin to live not for resolution, but for revelation. As you practice letting things be unfinished, gratitude grows in unexpected places. You start thanking life, not for what is done, but for what is still growing. Even your confusion becomes sacred, for it means you are still open. The unfinished heart is the one still capable of wonder. Peace does not come from completion, it comes from acceptance. When you stop demanding that everything be concluded, you stop living in tension. The unspoken, the unresolved, the still forming all become part of the wholeness of now. You learn that presence does not need closure. It needs surrender. And in that surrender, you find something deeper than control, the quiet power of trust. You finally understand that life was never meant to be a finished book. It was meant to be a living story, always written in the ink of change. The gentle power of letting things be unfinished is the freedom to rest inside, becoming, without fear of what's missing. The mind is a stage where endless debates perform without an audience. One part insists, another doubts, another defends, and the noise never ends. Each thought tries to win, but no one ever truly wins. The more you argue within, the further you drift from peace. Yet the present moment is not interested in sides, it dissolves them. The instant you return to what is real, the argument loses its fuel. You start noticing that every inner conflict depends on time, on memory, and expectation. The past argues for guilt. The future argues for control. But the present has no interest in either. It doesn't care what happened or what should happen. It only asks you to look, to breathe, to feel what exists now. And in that awareness, the mind's noise starts to fade. Each thought competes for attention, whispering that it must be resolved before you can rest. You try to think your way to clarity, but thought cannot end what it created. The mind cannot silence itself with more thinking. Only the present can end what time began. In the simplicity of now, all questions lose urgency because life stops waiting to be understood, it simply is. The present moment doesn't argue, it observes. It doesn't demand that you choose between right or wrong, success or failure. It holds everything gently, without judgment. When you enter that space, you stop needing answers because awareness itself becomes the answer. You realize that peace was never missing, it was just buried beneath commentary. The mind resists stillness because it thrives on comparison. It constantly asks, asterisk, what if, asterisk and times, why not, asterisk. But the present moment doesn't need improvement. It doesn't seek a better version of itself. When you inhabit this awareness, the compulsion to fix everything disappears. You begin to see that life doesn't need your control. It needs your attention. Every argument inside the mind depends on identification. You argue because you believe every thought is you, but thoughts are visitors. You are the space they pass through. When you anchor yourself in presence, the visitors stop causing chaos. They come, they go, and you remain calm, still, aware. The present teaches you that peace is not found in controlling thought, but in remembering you are not thought. When you stop defending one side of the mind against another, silence begins to grow naturally. You no longer feed the tension between doubt and desire. The space between thoughts widens, and in that space, you begin to hear the quiet hum of existence itself, something beyond language, beyond reasoning, beyond time. That hum is the sound of peace. Awareness doesn't argue with the mind's noise. It watches it dissolve. Like fog lifting under sunlight, the chatter weakens in the presence of attention. You realize that thinking loses power when it's seen clearly. You no longer chase or suppress thoughts. You let them rise and fall within the stillness that holds them all. In the present, fear has no roots. It lives in imagination, in what could happen, in what might go wrong. When you stay with what times is asterisk, the mind cannot maintain its stories. The heart begins to breathe freely again, unburdened by futures that never arrive. The world feels lighter, not because it changed, but because you stopped arguing with shadows. Even guilt loses its authority under the light of presence. The past can only exist when you keep thinking about it. But awareness is timeless. It cannot live in regret. When you stay here, the mistakes dissolve into lessons, and forgiveness appears naturally. You realize that no thought about yesterday can hurt you if you refuse to carry it into now. The present moment doesn't require effort, it requires surrender. You stop pushing against life and start aligning with it. In that surrender, you rediscover ease, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstance. The mind may still speak, but its voice no longer dictates your peace. You've stopped believing every story it tells. The more you stay anchored in the now, the more thoughts lose their weight. You begin to notice how most arguments are recycled, the same fears, the same doubts, repeated in different words. Awareness cuts through repetition like sunlight through fog. You start to see how much of your suffering was habit, not truth. Stillness becomes your teacher. It doesn't explain, it reveals. The present moment shows you what thinking could only theorize. You learn directly through experience rather than through analysis. The silence between thoughts becomes more nourishing than the thoughts themselves. The less you analyze, the more you understand. When you live in presence, clarity becomes effortless. You stop needing to decide everything right away. The right actions start arising naturally from awareness, without mental struggle. Decision-making turns into seeing rather than thinking. You respond to life instead of reacting to it. The present moment carries intelligence beyond logic. It feels, senses, and knows, without the need for explanation. It sees the whole picture that the analytical mind can only fragment. From that perspective, even confusion has purpose. Every pause, every uncertainty becomes part of a deeper order that thought alone cannot perceive. As your awareness deepens, you begin to notice the rhythm beneath experience. Every sound, every breath, every silence carries a pulse that connects all things. That rhythm never argues, it simply flows. The more you align with it, the less you resist life. Arguments dissolve because there's nothing left to defend. Even during chaos, presence remains untouched. You could be in noise, in conflict, in challenge, yet somewhere inside, stillness stays whole. That unbroken center is what awareness truly is. When you live from it, peace is no longer fragile. You no longer need silence outside to feel calm inside. The mind may still try to pull you back into its stories, but you begin to see them as echoes, faint reminders of an old habit. You don't chase them away, you simply don't follow them anymore. The present holds you steady, and thoughts lose interest when they are not entertained. What remains is peace that doesn't depend on control. The beauty of the present moment is that it ends arguments without taking sides. It doesn't say, "You were wrong," or "You were right." It simply reveals that neither was ever real. Every debate collapses into stillness. Every conflict returns to balance. The silence doesn't destroy the mind, it frees it. And as you rest in that freedom, life becomes astonishingly simple. You see that peace was never something to win or prove. It was the quiet underneath every thought, patiently waiting to be noticed. The present moment doesn't fix your mind. It shows you that it was never broken. In the now, the argument ends because awareness has no opponent. Logic builds walls. Trust opens doors. The mind wants patterns, evidence, and guarantees before it can rest. It analyzes every possibility, measuring outcomes that haven't yet happened. But life is not a formula to solve, it's a flow to join. The heart moves by rhythm, not reason. When you begin trusting life more than logic, you start feeling guided by something wiser than calculation. The mind calls trust irrational because it cannot measure it. It asks for proof, forgetting that proof only appears after you leap. You can plan every step and still fall. Or you can walk by faith and find yourself carried. Trust does not mean abandoning thought. It means letting awareness lead thought, not the other way around. The intelligence of life is deeper than any conclusion the mind can reach. You start to notice how logic often creates fear disguised as control. It insists on certainty, demanding that everything makes sense before you act. But meaning is born through experience, not before it. The heart understands this and moves quietly, while the mind hesitates in its endless rehearsal. Trust begins where logic runs out of breath. Logic builds plans. Trust builds peace. The mind prepares for every scenario, but trust allows life to reveal itself. You learn that not knowing can be a gift, that surrender is not weakness but alignment. When you stop insisting that life follow your reasoning, you make space for grace, that unseen order which only trust can access. You realize that logic is limited by what it already knows. It can only arrange the familiar, but life often leads you through the unknown. Trust is the bridge between knowledge and mystery. It whispers that not every step needs explanation, that your intuition is not chaos, it is clarity in another language. The deeper you go into awareness, the more you feel guided from within. The right decisions start arising naturally, without calculation. You begin to live from sensing instead of predicting. Trust turns every moment into a partnership with existence, where even detours serve a higher precision. Logic fears failure, but trust understands timing. It knows that what is delayed is not denied, and that patience reveals what force conceals. You stop rushing to fix or force outcomes and start letting them unfold. The longer you practice this, the more you see that life was never against you. It was always waiting for you to stop resisting. The mind's logic says, "Prove it first, then I'll believe." Life says, "Believe first, and I'll show you." Trust is a language that logic cannot translate because it belongs to presence, not prediction. Every time you let go of needing to know, you step into the rhythm of what already knows how to guide you. You start realizing that the best things in your life were never fully planned. The encounters, the turns, the moments of grace, none followed a formula. They arrived when you were open, not when you were certain. This is how trust works. It doesn't reward logic, it rewards surrender. Even in hardship, trust reveals hidden wisdom. Logic will ask, "Why me?" But trust listens for, "What is this showing me?" The mind sees problems. The heart sees pathways. With time, you understand that not every difficulty is punishment. Some are preparation for peace you couldn't yet carry. Trust invites you to live without constant guarantees. It teaches you to walk, even when you cannot see the entire road. Each step taken in faith builds an invisible strength. You learn to rely less on the illusion of control and more on the quiet certainty that life moves with precision beyond your plans. The more you trust, the lighter you become. The mind softens its grip and the body begins to relax. Anxiety fades because you no longer feel the need to anticipate every outcome. Trust brings you back to the present, the only place where life can actually happen. Logic stays trapped in time. Trust lives in timelessness. When you stop needing constant validation, clarity arises effortlessly. Trust opens you to possibilities that logic would have dismissed as impossible. It reminds you that wisdom does not always appear in thought, but in silence. You learn to listen not with the mind, but with awareness itself, where understanding arrives without words. Even creativity blossoms under trust. The logical mind repeats what is known. The trusting heart discovers what is new. You stop seeking certainty and start seeking truth. Creation, healing, and transformation all begin in this space where you allow the unknown to become your ally instead of your fear. Trust also teaches humility. You stop pretending to have all the answers and start participating in the mystery of existence. This humility does not make you small, it makes you receptive. You begin to see that wisdom is not something to collect, but something that flows through you when you stop controlling it. Logic often resists change, but trust flows with it. You stop fighting life's movement and begin to ride its current. What used to feel like chaos now feels like choreography. Every ending, every delay, every silence begins to make sense in its own time, not through explanation, but through experience. The more you live by trust, the more synchronicities appear, moments that seem too perfect to plan. You start realizing that life is constantly communicating through subtle signs, timing, and coincidences. What the mind calls luck, the heart recognizes as alignment. You stop questioning the flow and start dancing with it. Even pain becomes lighter when carried by trust. You no longer resist discomfort as an error to fix. You see it as part of your unfolding. Logic separates light from shadow. Trust embraces both. This balance allows healing to happen naturally, without forcing positivity. Trust becomes your quiet medicine. As your trust deepens, fear begins to fade. You start feeling safe, even in uncertainty, because you have stopped expecting the mind to hold everything together. Trust tells you that life has always known the way, it only needed you to stop blocking it with analysis. You begin to move with the ease of someone who no longer doubts the current. Trusting life more than logic doesn't mean abandoning reason. It means giving reason its proper place as a servant of awareness, not its ruler. The mind can plan, but only the heart can see. When you live from this harmony, every step, even the uncertain one, becomes guided. Trust is not blind, it is vision without fear. Peace that requires reasons is temporary. It comes and goes with circumstances, as fragile as the conditions that sustain it. But the peace that doesn't need an explanation exists beyond understanding. A quiet knowing that doesn't depend on logic, validation, or control. It's not something you create. It's what remains when you stop demanding that life makes sense. The mind believes peace must be earned through answers, solutions, or achievements. It tries to reason its way into calm, constructing meaning out of everything. But reasoning belongs to the surface, and peace lives beneath it. True peace doesn't ask times why asterisk. It simply times is asterisk. It doesn't argue with reality. It breathes with it. You begin to notice that most inner conflict is built on the need for explanation. You want closure, fairness, or clarity before you can rest. Yet the more you chase reasons, the more restless you become. The mind's hunger for understanding is endless. But peace asks for nothing. It exists silently, waiting for your permission to stop searching. This kind of peace cannot be found by solving problems. It is found by surrendering to what already is. When you stop trying to control every outcome, a softness emerges. You start to see that nothing in life owes you understanding, and still, everything holds meaning. The lack of explanation becomes its own serenity. Peace grows in the space where questions lose their urgency. You still wonder, but without the ache of needing answers. You let the unknown exist without fear. That acceptance becomes strength, the strength to remain whole, even when clarity doesn't come. You begin to realize that you don't need to understand life to trust it. The peace that doesn't need explanation doesn't remove emotion. It transforms your relationship with it. You can feel sadness without collapse, joy without attachment, uncertainty without panic. You become a vessel wide enough to hold everything. Stillness does not erase experience. It allows it to unfold without resistance. You start to see how explanations often limit the beauty of mystery. When you label something too soon, you shrink its depth. The mind rushes to categorize every feeling, but awareness waits. It knows that some truths can't be spoken, only lived. Silence, in this way, becomes the highest form of understanding. Peace without explanation feels like breathing after years of holding your breath. You stop analyzing the air and simply let it fill you. Nothing needs to be justified anymore. You stop explaining your healing, your boundaries, your joy. You simply embody them. This simplicity carries a quiet power that no argument can touch. The mind may still whisper, trying to draw you back into its logic, but its voice grows softer with each breath of acceptance. You realize you don't need to win debates with yourself anymore. When you stop defending peace, it becomes unshakable. The need to prove its worth fades, replaced by the grace of simply existing in it. You learn to rest in not knowing. The absence of certainty no longer feels like a void. It feels like space. You let things unfold without narration. The silence between moments starts to speak louder than explanations ever could. In that silence, peace deepens, steady, grounded, alive. This peace doesn't depend on the absence of problems. It coexists with them, quietly watching while storms pass. You no longer wait for life to be calm, to feel calm. You start carrying stillness within you, a space untouched by outer chaos. The world moves, but something in you remains unmoved. You stop asking life to explain why things happened the way they did. You no longer measure peace by the amount of understanding you gain. Some experiences were never meant to be analyzed. They were meant to awaken something wordless within you. The mind seeks reasons. The soul seeks presence. Peace without explanation is not indifference. It's maturity. It's the ability to stay kind, to stay soft, even when nothing adds up. You no longer chase emotional logic. You allow emotional truth. The heart knows what the mind cannot. You learn that acceptance is not giving up. It's giving in to what is already whole. You begin to sense that peace isn't achieved. It's remembered. Beneath the layers of overthinking and resistance, it has always been there, quiet, patient, eternal. The more you stop chasing clarity, the clearer everything becomes. Stillness reveals what explanation once obscured. The more you live this way, the more effortless peace becomes. You don't maintain it, it maintains you. It doesn't demand constant effort or attention. It simply flows through awareness like water finding its level. You start to see that your natural state is peace. Everything else is temporary disturbance. Even in the face of pain, this peace remains. It doesn't deny hurt. It embraces it without losing balance. You can cry without despair, fail without shame, and begin again without fear. That steadiness doesn't come from explanation but from surrender. You no longer ask, "Why me?" You simply trust that every season serves its purpose. The world around you may still be noisy, but your response changes. You no longer meet noise with noise. You listen deeply, and in that listening, you hear life's quiet rhythm underneath the chaos. Peace becomes the awareness that everything belongs, even confusion, even uncertainty. This kind of peace cannot be taught. It must be lived. It grows through practice, through patience, humility, and awareness. The more you surrender the need to interpret everything, the lighter you become. You begin walking through life as if every moment is complete, even when it isn't. Peace without explanation feels like coming home. It's not loud, not triumphant, but deeply real. It lives in ordinary things, a breath, a pause, a glance of sunlight across the floor. It doesn't ask to be understood, it only asks to be felt. The mind moves, the world shifts, but peace remains untouched, unwavering, whole. And in that unspoken stillness, you realize that this was all you were ever looking for, the quiet understanding that needs no proof. The peace that doesn't need an explanation is not the end of thought, but the beginning of freedom. You have stopped asking life to justify itself, and life has answered you with silence that feels like love. Peace doesn't arrive with a sound, it arrives with a sigh. After all, the thoughts have argued, all the fears have performed, and all the plans have dissolved. Something gentle begins to breathe beneath it all. It is the awareness that was always there, steady, silent, and untouched by every storm your mind ever created. You begin to see that the freedom you were chasing was never outside your thoughts, but within the space between them. The journey was never about silencing the mind. It was about remembering that you were never its prisoner. Every chapter has guided you closer to the stillness behind noise, the awareness that watches without judging, listens without reacting, and feels without drowning. This is the ground of your being, the place where overthinking loses its power because it has nothing left to control. Freedom doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means thoughts no longer own you. They pass like clouds across an open sky, noticed but not feared. You no longer need to win every mental battle. You simply stop showing up for war. Stillness becomes your teacher, not through answers, but through presence. You now understand that awareness is stronger than analysis, surrender wiser than control, and trust deeper than logic. Life was never asking you to think harder. It was asking you to see clearer. Every time you pause, breathe, and let a thought drift without following it, you are practicing the quiet art of liberation. This freedom is not loud, and it does not demand to be proven. It shows itself in how gently you now live, in how slowly you speak, how deeply you listen, how kindly you meet your own chaos. You have learned that peace is not found by running away from the mind, but by walking beside it with compassion. Let the noise come and go. Let uncertainty remain uncertain. Let unfinished moments stay open. The one who observes it all, the silent witness within you, is already free. And in that quiet realization, thought loses its hold, and the self that always tried to control finally learns how to rest. You are no longer fighting your mind. You are walking with it, softly, without resistance. The silence that follows is not empty, it's full of life. This is the peace that thinking could never reach, the freedom that effort could never earn. You have not escaped your mind, you have befriended it. And that friendship, gentle, patient, and wordless, is the true freedom from overthinking.